In order to work into the education system and to improve it and to bring some substantial changes, not some, but fundamental changes into the system, I think we, right at the outset, must define the education itself. That makes the whole thing, clear before us, before the administrators, before the teachers, before the advisors, educationists. Because so far what we have been practicing is the Indian school systems that we have been practicing, which itself is a great kind of challenge for educationists and for many others, given that the Indian education system is a vestige of a British colonial system. And even though many of the educationists and the teachers and intellectuals dislike the system, yet having this system gone deep into our consciousness and also in our culture, it is very difficult for us to change it. But I think we must make effort to bring some change. In this respect, I'm not addressing only in the Indian Tibetan context, but in the Indian continental context at a larger perspective. So, if we define the education itself, then we can design the rest of the things, and we can put in place the rest of the things like the teachers, the textbooks, the pedagogy, and other facilities, the environment, and things like that. So we have in India the Shiksha, and education is called the Shiksha, but unfortunately, although the Shiksha term is retained as we had in the past in ancient India, but the inner value is missed, in the education, this very term of education and very term of Shiksha. Because in ancient India, Shiksha means a holistic kind of development. And as you can see in many of the non-Buddhist Indian philosophical treatises, and also in the Buddhist teachings, and the great masters like Nagarjuna, Asanga, and Asanga and Chandrakirti, Bhaviveka, Vasubandhu, and many of these great masters have referred to Shiksha as something that is for holistic development. So, like in one of the sutras of the Buddha, which is very often recited, Heart Sutra, in that there is a context when Manjushri, when the Avalokiteshvara was asked that what does Shiksha mean? How the Bodhisattvas who want to practice the Bodhisattvas practices should be trained, or should be educated, should be shikshita. Bodhisattva yaihi bodhicharya charyam chartukamena katham shikshidabhyam, how they should be trained, or how they should be educated. If we take this education as a English term for shiksha, then how they should be educated. So then Avalokiteshvara says that they should see the things as intrinsically non-existent, and they should see the things as intrinsically non-existent, and then through that they should look into the external phenomena and inner phenomena, because by seeing that way, then it reduces the afflictive emotions, and by that we reduce our negative actions and other things. So therefore, the fundamental way of developing a shiksha and getting a training into that process is to have a fundamental change into our perspective, and then thereby bringing some transformative measures within our consciousness and our practice. So that is why the very concept of shiksha is very different in the Indian ancient context and Buddhist and all the Buddhist and non-Buddhist cultural context and philosophical traditions. So therefore, as His Holiness rightly gave us, the guidelines yesterday, saying that modern education is lacking the inner, education. So we need to be more introverted rather than being extroverted. The present education, the modern world education, is more extroverted and more material oriented. So therefore, we need to make our education more, balancing between the external education and the inner education. So therefore, our very design of our education system should be something that can keep balance between the material, development and inner development. So if we can keep in mind this very fact, as we were guided by His Holiness, and he had this vision, and he has been, speaking all over the world and addressing on many issues of education. So, and this is very well received around the world by the educationists and by the scientists and many other people who are involved in education. So, and following the advice and guidance of His Holiness, many of the educationists in the West and many of the education institutions in the West, they have adopted the meditation and mindfulness, based meditation and things like that into their education, training and education system. So which has made tremendous, kind of, contribution and brought change into their system. So I think this kind of thing is something we need to, right from the very beginning, we should be very clear in our mind while we define the education itself. So by doing that, then we can bring changes, in the content of the subjects. Then by doing that, we can bring changes, or we can, bring the component of inner values while we select teachers. By doing that, we can bring changes in the pedagogical methods. By doing that, we can bring changes in the environment of this, schools. So therefore, right from the very beginning, we should be very clear about, the very scope and the very definition of education. So in this session, we are supposed to be talking and discussing about a teacher. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, that in ancient Indian tradition and Buddhist tradition, particularly in Buddhist tradition, we have a very strong kind of education system that was quite, pragmatic in many sense. And I would like to quote a verse in Sutra Alankar by Arya Asanga, wherein he defines, or he defines the quality and qualification of a teacher. So the text is available in original Sanskrit. It reads like this: Mitram Shrayet Danda Shama Upashantam Gunadikam Sodimam Agam Adhyam Prabhutatvam Vajasa Abhyupetam Kripatmakam Khed Vivarchitam Cha Shingen Dua Shiva Nyer Shiva Yundel Hawa Sunja Lungichu Dingi Rabtu Togo Makede Sewe Tangi Kyowa Pangla Ten. So this means there are 11 characteristics that a teacher is required to be. So there are many definitions and characteristics of teachers defined in the treatises and the sutras, but this is something that is more well known, and it is applicable to our school level teachers as well as to a very highly kind of a spiritual teacher. So Danda, Shama and Upashanda, the teachers should be more peaceful, calm. Of course, we may not be able to get a teacher who has highly spiritually realized, but relative in comparison to the taught to the students, the teacher should be more calmer and more peaceful. And Dand, Shant, he should be more concentrated, less diverted, disturbant. And then Upashanta, he should be equipped with the more kind of, better and higher wisdom than the taught, right? Wisdom not in terms of the professional subject, but wisdom in terms of understanding the reality. And Gunadigam, he should be more, he should be more in terms of the qualification, in terms of the professional academic qualities, right? And Sodhamam means he should be industrious and making effort to what he is supposed to be doing. And then he should be learned and more, well read in his subject. And then Prabhutatvam means he should be understanding the essence of the subject that he is teaching. That's very important thing. And then he should be very well skilled in articulation, right? And then, of course, he should be very compassionate towards his student. And then lastly, he should not be impatient towards the students. Even if the students, need to be taught repeatedly, even for 10, 15 times, he should not be impatient. Rather, he should be ready to teach them again and again. So these are the 11, characteristics or the points that a teacher is required. I think if we have this kind of parameter for a teacher, and if a teacher, contains this kind of, qualifications, then I think he or she should be the best teacher for the, for the schools. And with respect to teachers, then of course there will be lots of many other suggestions coming up. So regarding some of the suggestions, how we should recruit the teachers, and what kind of qualifications there should be, and what kind of trainings should be given to the teachers. So I will say this at the end of the session. So now I would like to invite the honorable members to reflect on this very issue of the teacher, its qualifications, its standard, and its the trainings that they need to be given, and all kind of developments that teachers should have. So I would like to, and I think this would go for how long? Yeah. So may I start with Professor Krishna Kumarji?
Thank you, sir. I'll be making some very initial remarks on a subject which is both complex in itself and draws a special kind of complexity because of the context in which we are contemplating this issue of the teacher. The larger context of teachers in India is not a very inspiring context for us to draw ideas from, because India itself is grappling with the issues which you have outlined just now, starting with the issue of how to attract talented aspirants to this profession and how to retain them there. How to make them feel positive and dedicated to their profession. In fact, as a whole, India is going through a crisis in the profession of teaching, especially teaching of the young. So, in the specific context of Tibetan schools, we obviously have to start on a note that would suggest that we are here to make an attempt to think about it creatively, rather than get bogged down by the overwhelming sense of crisis which as an Indian I feel there is in this particular subject. The report that has been circulated outlines the issues quite specifically. All I would like to add to that is the dimension that if you are looking at preparation of the teacher, then the greater part of that challenge is in preparation of the primary teacher than in preparation of the secondary and the senior secondary teacher. Though certain challenges are similar in scale, but there are more basic challenges at the primary level. Some of these challenges arise out of the history of primary education, which generally in our part of the world has been an area of second-rate treatment or neglect, you might call it. And for that reason, for that historical reason, training of the primary teacher has received less attention and a lower level status kind of attention. And if you look at it from the point of view of educational theory, this is a very serious contradiction, because educational theory reminds us that it's the education of the primary level child, which has far more pervasive and deeper and longer lasting consequences for a person's life, or lifelong consequences, compared to what happens at the secondary and senior secondary level. And the reason for that is very obvious. It's rooted in modern psychology and in our understanding of the human life cycle. What happens during childhood, in the first few years of childhood, has far greater consequences for what happens to us as human beings, to our personality, our proclivities, our weaknesses, our strengths, our character, and so on. So the person who teaches the primary level child, let's roughly look at the age band. We are talking about roughly 4 to 11 years of age. The person who acts as a professional teacher in that period is a far more important person in the life of a child, even though that person may not be recalled or remembered in all the details of the work that he did, yet that person is far more important because of the consequences that that person's initiatives, that person's efforts have for the rest of our life. And this is therefore important, that in our endeavor in the context of Tibetan schools, we try to balance the long history of neglect of the primary teacher and his training, her training in the Indian system, and redress that balance, redress that problem by creating a far greater emphasis or a sense of commitment to dedicating ourselves to the education of that teacher. Which brings me to my second point, that education of the teacher can be very quickly and simply encapsulated by remembering that teachers are produced by the same system of education, and they are members of the same society in which they are supposed to act as teachers. In other words, if they are to act as teachers who will change things or who will create a break in the socio-cultural, economic, political history of a society, then a teacher has to be somebody who can transcend his or her own education, its weaknesses, its limitations. And this is the job actually of the teacher training or teacher education program, to enable the person who aspires to be a teacher to transcend what happened to him or her during her childhood, during her education, and what has been her experience of the society which has shaped her as a person to this point. Now, when we say transcend, we don't mean in a magical sense or in a sense of an incident. That's not the transcendence one is talking about. One is talking about transcendence in a reflective sense, in a conscious sense. And that's why teacher education program is essentially a program which ought to provide opportunities for reflection. Reflection on what happened to me. How did I become the person I am? And how can I understand myself better in myself as well as in relation to my society and its future. That is the reflective or contemplative curriculum of any decent teacher education program. The rest is a matter of detail. In the context of the primary child, you know that the curriculum or the subject matter is a child herself. Primary years are not the years when curriculum is differentiated into subjects at any length, like sciences and mathematics and language and so on. It's all in a early stage of blossoming, and interrelationships between these areas are very important. Of course, language lies at the heart of this network of interrelationships. A child whose language acquires a purposive, meaningful eloquence is a child who you can predict will go a long way in life, no matter what that child does. And a child whose early language learning in speech, listening, reading, and writing has been with a teacher or in a system which breaks the bridges between words and meaning, that child is going to stumble throughout life. We know that. In fact, in the policy statement that I just read, that you have prepared in the context of Tibetan education, that point has been very eloquently made with reference to an ancient text which points out that it's that link between sound and meaning that shapes our health in use of language. And that health has to be achieved in the primary years, in the early primary years, in fact. So if a primary level training, teacher training program were to be conceptualized, to be executed, it will have to be grounded in one or two major principles. One being the primacy of childhood, of early childhood. And secondly, the primacy of language and its skills. The teacher has to be somebody who will absorb the teacher training opportunity in terms of these two concerns. So the primary teacher has to be somebody who will devote her life or his life to this level. Unlike the typical South Asian or Indian situation where a primary teacher aspires to become a secondary teacher rather than remain in the primary grades, because the primary grades are considered low status. How do we create that sense of status for the primary teacher is, of course, one very major concern, which is related to so many issues which have to do with how we run our institutions, how we perceive or how we create self-identities of teachers. And I'm sure many of my colleagues who run schools will have a lot more to say on that. And then, of course, the question comes of who will teach the teacher? Who will work as the teacher educator in primary teacher training institutes? I would consider that as a very major point. In my university, Delhi University, we are very, that's one of the very few things with which we feel satisfied as a university or as a department of education. Namely that we, I wouldn't say invented, but certainly we constructed a completely new program about 15 or 18 years ago, precisely with that aim of giving a strong sense of self-identity to the primary school teacher and creating a very strong base of theoretical knowledge with sufficient amount of exposure to the reality of schools, which sometimes is heartbreaking, but giving that exposure in an environment which permits that our teachers, these students of that program, to reflect on that as a historical reality that they are here to improve upon. This is, I'm referring to the Bachelor of Elementary Education program, BLEd, which is a four-year degree program offered in 8 colleges of the University of Delhi, initiated by the Maulana Azad Center for Elementary and Social Education of my institute some 2 decades ago. And it has had phenomenal results in terms of the kind of people that it has contributed to the school system. My colleague here, Mr. Arun Kapoor, is one of the admirers of this program. He knows what kind of teachers it has produced. But if I were to sum up in my final concluding remark of these initial remarks, I would say, from what I know of the students with whom I have worked for many years in this program, and many of them have stayed on with us to do higher level degree programs, even as they continue to work with primary level children. The one thing it does for them, they say, in those 4 years, it makes them think about themselves. It has a lot of that input. Whether they are going to become science teachers or mathematics teachers or language teachers is the second question. The first question is it makes them think about their own socialization. How did they become the person they are? Is the step that they somehow managed to take in this program around the second or third year, it takes that long, so that by fourth year they know what are the things that they alone can do best, and probably they will have to do them alone without assistance from administrators who might not understand what they are doing, or colleagues who might not understand what they are doing, or even parents who might not understand what they are doing. The ability to remain alone in their pursuit, yet pursue it with full commitment, I think it's a wonderful achievement for a person to have, and this program does that. So I would strongly recommend that program if we are going to work out the details at some point, and the Department of Education can look at the curriculum, and I would suggest that perhaps the Central University of Himachal Pradesh, who's Vice Chancellor and Dean of Education, are here to look at that possibility as one of the things. But of course, I know the Tibetan administration itself has a teacher education program which has to be studied, analyzed, researched to see how it can be enriched with the help of the curriculum documents that exist in this sector, including the curriculum of the Bachelor of Elementary Education program and various other documents, including the National Council of Teacher Education's own National Curriculum Framework 2009, which is quite a major document. These can be used and analyzed by our colleagues here in the Department of Education to review the existing teacher education program and to see how curricular inputs can go in, and then we can think about how teacher educators who are working in your teacher education institution can be exposed to and then can be made to own the kind of work they want to do, because unless they own the new approach and the various new activities that they may have to incorporate in their own teaching and training, results will be limited. So all of that is a research and kind of inquiry agenda that has to be perhaps pursued over the next several months before we can come up with a reasonable decision as to how to enrich the existing programs, consolidate them, and then how to start new program if we decide to do such a thing. Thank you very much.
May I now request Professor Farkan Kamarji?
Speaking immediately after Professor Krishna Kumar is a challenge. Particularly, as I said, that I am the least informed of all of you about this teaching and teacher in school education. And more so because what I'm going to say is perhaps mundane compared to the philosophical level at which Professor Krishna Kumar was talking. And I'm taking these three objectives together: the teaching, the quality, and the school administration. I could go through excellent report on the status of schools that you have, and also some deliberation of the committees and where they commented about the teachers and other things. And of course, the solutions and the suggestions that are given. In fact, when I had received the agenda, I had sent the agenda note to Professor Dr. Arvind Jha, and at that time we did not have a copy of that report. The suggestions that he gave on the agenda note, and when I read that report, there are many commonalities. So educationally speaking, if you want to improve quality of teachers and quality of education, I mean, theory would say and people would suggest that we need to recruit teachers who are of quality, To be able to do that, you need to pay them sufficiently, uh, because you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, so you have to increase. Also about their service conditions, retirement benefits. I mean, these are all, and that has come from the survey of the principals, also the reports by your Secretary Education and by the committee meetings. I am for all of these things. Please do not misunderstand me, but the experience in India, unfortunately, does not support that as you increase these materialistic benefits to teacher, you necessarily get better teachers and the quality of education improves. For example, I mean, these kinds of issues, as Professor Krish Kumar was saying, I mean, even in India we are faced with. Government schools pay their teachers better. The retirement benefits in government schools are significantly higher and better than the private schools. But then, going by at least the preference of people, the children, where everybody wants to go to a private schools, that at least comment that perhaps they are not satisfied with the quality of government schools, even though the teachers are very well paid, or at least paid higher than what the private schools pay. So I'm not very sure. While I would say that we need to pay our teachers sufficiently, this is just one of the conditions, and I'm not very sure that simply by doing that, we should be able to have quality teachers or quality teaching. Some time ago, we had done a study, and that was about cost, quality, and resource use efficiency, and of the multiple kinds of educational system. And there the focus was the publicly funded schools, the private schools. And a similar study was replicated a few years later in another situation context, in fact, from Madras University. Another professor of economics did that study. First we did in Delhi, he did in Chennai region, and one more. And there is some kind of a common findings that are emerging out of these studies. First of all, it is the perception of quality that matters the most. And for school education, barring those proxy parameters of the board results, people are largely guided by the perception of quality. And for that perception of quality, investment in infrastructure, plays a very important role. Better the school building looks, higher is the perception of quality that people have in their mind about that school. English medium, at least in Indian context, is considered to be an indicator of the quality, and people are moving from the vernacular or the Hindi medium schools or the regional language schools to English medium schools, because perhaps they see that that is the language of the market, that is the language of the job, that is the language of for mobility in the social hierarchy.